So welcome everybody to the latest installment of our executive webinar series. My name is John Karstenbay. I'm a CIO of my base pay and the host of today's webinar. Today we're covering a very important and pressing topic. It's on the intersection between the healthcare and technology. And we have an amazing panel of industry thought leaders for all of you guys today. And I will let each one of them introduce themselves in just a minute. We have a range of topics prepared for the bulk of the webinar, and we'll allocate 15 minutes at the end of the show for a live Q&A. But if all of the participants, if you guys have questions, just feel free to drop them here in the Q&A section or in the chat as well. So I'll pick those at the end for one of the panelists to answer. We're live streaming on YouTube and LinkedIn as well, so there's a lot of participants there as well. So super exciting. With that said, I'm gonna let's start the webinar, and I'll begin with the introductions of our panelists. If you don't mind, just introduce yourself, your role, the company name, and a brief overview of some of the responsibilities and what you currently oversee at your organization. And with that said, Deepu, I'm gonna pick on you if you don't mind starting with the self-introduction.
Absolutely, thank you, John. Good morning. First of all, happy to be part of this great discussion. I'm Deepu Kumar. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Baptist Health, South Florida, one of the prestigious and prominent health institutions in the South Florida region. Relatively new to Baptist and to healthcare, joined last year to drive the digital transformation. Prior to joining Baptist, I was the VP of Engineering for Disney within their DPEP segment.
That's great. Awesome. Thanks so much, Deepu. Great to have you here. Steve, if you don't mind going next.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Stephen May. First, just glad to be here with these other recognized healthcare leaders here this morning. Certainly honored to be participating. So I currently serve as the Chief Technology Officer for ChenMed, a 30-year-old primary ambulatory care provider that operates over 100 centers in 12 different states, but also have had the great opportunity to start launching sub-brands and sub-companies underneath the ChenMed umbrella, one of which is Intune Health, which is a very forward-looking way to practice primary ambulatory care that's going to disrupt that space. And also Curity, our new health tech organization, where we're looking to commercialize and sell our software in a software as a service model. Prior to joining ChenMed Curity, I served over a decade at a large software as a service organization called Ultimate Software in the human capital management space. And again, happy to be here and be participating on this panel. Thank you.
Super exciting. Thanks so much, Steve. And last but not least, Alex.
Thank you, John. So my name is Alex Espinosa. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Cleveland Clinic Weston. I've been in healthcare since 1991. I've been with Cleveland Clinic for 21 years, and my background is imaging. So I started out as an X-ray tech, ultrasound tech, and I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to have some discussion and even learn myself from these other distinct panelists. So thank you for inviting me.
That's very exciting. And I'm particularly excited about the mix and diversity of the background of each of the panelists. We have a great representation from both the technology side, the business and the operations. And with that said, I would like to kick off the conversation around healthcare technology trends and research that you guys are currently performing in terms of what are you mostly excited about in this particular space, and maybe share some insights on the trends on technology side that you're looking at implementing at your organization currently. Steve, if you don't mind sharing some insights from that perspective with us.
You know, basically our focus right now is how to apply a lot of the great technologies out there at the right particular place for the right desired outcomes. So some of the things that we're looking at is really around how do we influence our patient behaviors, and for us that's really leveraging machine learning and data science to see what triggers we can put in our technology to help again influence our patient behavior. So that comes in the form of how do we get patients to follow our care plans and intervention plans and make sure that our patients are taking their medication when they need to be taking their medication. And so we are also looking at heavily in terms of how patient engagement, primarily through our mobile technology. And so that's the other area that we're spending a ton of time with is how do we engage with our patients? How do we embed our experience and our technology in our patients' daily lives? And how do we use things like machine learning to influence their behaviors and make sure that they're following the intervention plans and the care plans that we're putting together? Similarly, we're starting to look at other patient engagement type technologies. There seems to be a growing trend at AI-driven robots in the home. So there's several different vendors out there in the space. And we're looking forward to potentially partnering with those vendors to offer that AI type smart agent in the home through the use of this smart hardware. So those are some of the things that we're looking at currently today.
That's super exciting, Steve, and I'm looking forward to diving a little bit deeper into some of these advanced technologies and the application aspect of that your organization. Alex, Cleveland Clinic is known as the brand of being a very innovative, technology-wise organization. Can you share any examples of how the company is transforming healthcare through the use of technology?
Yeah, so John, so I think, when it comes to technology, we're looking at three areas, focusing on three areas. One is patient access. Another one is quality outcomes, and the third is caregiver satisfaction. So, a lot of the conferences that we've gone to for healthcare, a lot of it's been focusing on AI, and how does AI play a role in the future or even now in providing not only access, quality outcomes, but improved caregiver satisfaction. When you talk about opportunities from a clinical point of view, we're talking about things like robot assisted surgeries. We're talking about virtual visits or virtual healthcare, which really got fast tracked during the pandemic. We're talking about 3D printing, which already has existed, but how do you really take advantage of 3D printing when it comes to surgical outcomes? And we're also talking about things like supply chain. How does AI play a role in our supply chain management in order for us to really take advantage of, product pricing, tier pricing, usage, in order for us to reduce our costs? So, when it comes to the caregiver satisfaction, there's a role for AI in the future to reduce some administrative tasks that really lead to burnout. And, so when it comes to, again, either whether it's virtual visits, outcomes, I think that due to our staff shortages that we're all seeing in healthcare, I think that there is an increased focus on how technology can reduce the burden on our clinicians.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Alex. And continuing the conversation on the innovative collaboration and more specifically on the organizational structure, Deepu, if you don't mind, share with us your thoughts on some of the practical recommendations as far as structuring the teams that would promote such innovative collaboration and deliver results between the healthcare operations and the technology teams.
Sure. John, so in recent past, we have seen a shift because of the influence and the reach that technology has on business outcomes. We have seen a slow transition of technology leaders becoming more of business leaders. And hence, a traditional siloed organization structure or team structure are becoming more dysfunctional recent times, if you look at it. So from what I've seen, a shared responsibility model where teams come together, discuss business opportunities, and ideate on an innovative solution together works best. Now, we can put the best of the structures in place, but if you are inflexible in terms of your approaches, the results may not be great. Digitizing, as someone once said, digitizing a broken process will only give broken solutions. So, which is where product management as a discipline plays a crucial role. A strong product management discipline with well thought through product strategy and roadmap is key to the success, even with the right structure from an organizational hierarchy perspective. And I'm sorry, it's not simple in terms of AI. We put one structure together and every organization can adapt to that one structure, right? So it's, while the foundational principles and concepts remain the same, each organization needs to adapt or tweak to their cultural fit in terms of how it needs to be structured.
Yeah, you touch upon a very important topic of the team structure, and I would love to get, Steve, perhaps your thoughts on creating that culture that really attracts and also retains the top talents. It's a very prevalent topic, especially in this current market conditions that we've all experienced over the past couple of years. Share with us what has worked well for you, and maybe on the other side of the spectrum, what have you learned, and maybe some of the retrospective lessons learned through some of the talent acquisition strategies that may have worked well or have not. Share with us some of those thoughts.
Yeah, great. It's a great great question. I know culture is at the top of mind of a lot of executives today. So when I think about culture, I think about it in a couple different ways. First is to make sure that you have an environment that kind of achieves a couple of key pillars. One is that you make sure you have an environment where people can be heard and that you respect their voice. Really to give a sense of community, like to make sure that they feel connected to those around them, and really to make sure that you're investing in their future. And so another thing, another part of that strategy is really to try to create a sense of pride. People want to be proud of the place that they work, and that really comes in a lot of different motivators. So different things motivate different people. And so we want to make sure that we're kind of focusing on all of those different intrinsic motivators to make sure that, people, again, are connected to what the organization is doing, and also develop a true sense of pride of, what they're doing and what the organization is doing. And so that can come in the form of making sure that the organization has an element of altruism or giving back to the community. That could also contain working on some of the latest and greatest technologies for the people that are motivated by technology. Some people are motivated by the opportunity to disrupt an industry. And so we offer that within our organization. So it's really kind of creating that narrative that you can get people proud of their company and proud of what they're doing, as well as creating that environment that kind of hits on some of those key things that I mentioned, making sure they have a voice and it's respected, a sense of community, and really invest in developing and growing your people. So those are, I think, some of the key highlights.
Those are great points, Steve, you're making. And Deepu, do you have anything to add from that perspective when it comes to attracting and retaining top talent as you are building fully dispersed and global teams on a virtual scale?
Sure, I absolutely agree with everything Steve just mentioned. I'll add a couple of things on top of that. Typically, a strong, healthy culture starts from the top. So it boils down to embedding a strong set of core goals, values, beliefs, and behaviors that everybody in the organization, from the C-level to the frontline staff, believes in and they can get behind, right? When it comes to core values, it doesn't mean anything if the leadership doesn't align with it. So once we define the values and the purpose, we need to be deliberate in the hiring process to look for talent who share the same core beliefs. We should also be intentional in terms of communicating the vision and values so that it's clear for people who are reaching in outside in, and they have a view of what the company stands for, what values are being looked at. Next, I would add is a culture of continuous growth and development. Top performers typically prioritize growth in their career. So we need to be careful in terms of ingraining those within the culture. Those are the two things that I would add.
Thank you, Deepu. And you couldn't have set me up any better for the further question that I have when it comes to building high-performing teams. And Alex, you as the Chief Operating Officer, you have a great deal of experience leading teams on different scale from the operations and the business side. tell us a little bit more about maybe some of your thoughts on the characteristics of high-performing teams and what strategies could be leveraged to cultivate and foster such attributes of fully dispersed teams, for example.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there are many characteristics that build a great team, and I'll touch on a couple of them. I think, you know, the first one, which is probably the toughest one, is building trust among each other. You know, we try to create, and we're not perfect at it, but we try to create a no-fault environment where it gives our caregivers the ability to report any issues that they see in our organization without having any fault blamed. You know, at the end of the day, we're looking at providing safety and quality, and giving the caregivers the ability to report something. If you see something, say something. I think it is imperative to have a successful, high-performing team environment. You know, it would be great. It's not always the case, but if we all share a vision, I think that always helps. You know, if you give autonomy to your leaders to make decision-making decisions, I think that also leads to high-performing teams. You know, I try not to create a micromanaging environment. I really give autonomy to my managers to really make decisions, but along with that comes accountability. So giving them accountability, giving them autonomy, having healthy tension is good. You know, it's okay to challenge each other professionally, and make sure that we're all focusing on goals and results. And I think that when you, and there's so many characteristics, John, but I think those 5 or 6 are my core value of successfully creating high-performing teams.
Makes perfect sense. Thanks, Alex. I spent a great deal of my time talking to other executives in different industries. And one of the topics that's been coming up, especially lately, is virtual leadership teams. Steve, maybe from your perspective, as you are as a head of technology and as you're building out your leadership team within technology at a healthcare organization, how do you find that right balance between collaboration and individual performance space within your leadership team, where perhaps majority of the group is not co-located?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think we take an interesting approach here at ChenMed and Curity in the fact that a large degree of not only our leaders, but our staff are actually cohabitating. So we've kind of gone in a slightly different direction in the fact that we have this belief that while you can definitely build a great culture and you can definitely be successful as a business by having distributed teams, we've kind of recognized and share this core belief that there's no substitute for being in person when it comes to building strong relationships and really around innovation. Especially around innovation, there seems to be that X factor, that force multiplier to actually be able to kind of be there and share that whiteboard amongst your team members there in person. So we've taken a very interesting approach where we've ended up hiring 95% of our leaders and our technology staff in the South Florida market. And so we do have a hybrid working environment where 2 or 3 days a week for the activities that you kind of need that alone time. For example, software engineering. Our software engineers could use that time to put on their headphones and crank out code on their keyboards. But then also we're asking them to come to the office again the other 2 or 3 days to make sure that as we're having our team meetings and team building and ideating, that they're there in person for that. So like I said, I know there's been a significant kind of shift or kind of thoughts around virtual work, but we've kind of again doubled down on being in person and ended up doing a lot of our hires here locally, and even for those remote hires have ended up relocating people from even some of the largest tech companies out west down here to Miami. It just so we have this fortuitous time where it seems like Miami now is on the roadmap for the technology or in the spotlight for technology. And so that's been helping us kind of attract some of the country's best talent, but also enabling us to kind of relocate those folks and be here with us here in South Florida.
Definitely very interesting strategies that you guys are currently implementing. And it's true that we're definitely seeing a trend where with shift some type of a hybrid model where with moving from a totally virtual environment to some type of a hybrid setup where portion of the time or portion of the teams are being co-located. And it would be great to follow up on that conversation down the road to see the types of results that you guys are experiencing. And to take that a little bit further, we've briefly touched upon some strategies when it comes to attracting the top talent and building that culture of innovation, so to say. Um, Alex, with so many opportunities out there in the current markets, the war on retention becomes even more of a spotlight for a lot of organizations like yours, Cleveland Clinic. Tell us a little bit more about some of the strategies that you provide maybe to some of your client or partner companies when it comes to practical approaches to really retaining that top talent.
Yeah, I think, John, outside of the obvious, which is compensation, and being competitive from a compensation point of view, I think that there's some things that can be done in order to retain and incentivize, your work force. And I think some of the things are like, career ladder. Does your organization, and this is not exclusive to healthcare, this is just in general, does your organization provide a career ladder opportunity for folks that are in entry level or mid-level positions? With the current state of the workforce, they're looking for instant gratification, and that comes with compensation. But I think that if you really dig deep and you're happy at the organization, creating an environment where you could have career ladder opportunities and growth potential, I think can weigh on whether somebody stays or leaves. We've done other things like work from home. We have to be flexible. There are a lot of options for our workforce these days, so we have to be flexible. So giving work from home opportunities for our caregivers, flexible schedules. We can't be as rigid as we used to be because of the state of healthcare and our ability to retain caregivers. We have to be flexible. We've done other things like loan forgiveness for entry-level caregivers that come in with a hefty loan. If they sign a commitment with us, we will entertain loan forgiveness. So these are not unique just to healthcare, but I think giving the flexibility of our caregivers outside of just straight compensation, which is just as important, obviously, I think gives a company the ability to not only to retain, but to really grow our leaders that are, coming into our organization.
Thanks, Alex. And Deepu, can you share anything else in addition to that for such a reputable brand as Baptist Health? You would think that it's relatively maybe easier for you to retain the top talent than other smaller organizations. But tell us a little bit more what really happens behind the scenes when it comes to those practical strategies.
So, John, I have a slightly different perspective. The financial independence, security incentives, they're all important, but they don't drive the long-term loyalty that they once did. From a retention perspective, it's slightly different. First of all, we need to give employees a reason to get behind. Why we do what we do, and the impact it has on the organization, community at large, and ensuring that vision and purpose gets articulated clearly so that everybody buys into it. That's crucial. Next is the technical autonomy. I'm being a technologist myself, I'm selfish in terms of what I pick. So I'll pick on the technology roles. Giving the technology folks the autonomy in terms of defining the how within a set guardrails, and give them the freedom to learn and innovate is critical. Third, we should absolutely invest in people, and I agree with Alex on that. Offering programs that helps employees grow both professionally and personally is a great way to retain. Then comes the stereotypical ones, which may sound more like cliche, the rewards recognition, flexibility at work, open and transparent communication, and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you, Deepu. Steve, anything that you can add that doesn't fit out, maybe outside of the strategies that Alex and Deepu had covered?
No, a lot of the similar strategies we're using here, in addition to is really having that strong mission. I think Deepu was starting to talk about that a little bit, but for us, a lot of our team members really get attached to our core mission as a business, and the opportunity to really disrupt the industry that we're in tends to motivate a lot of our folks. And then just one other thing to add, and I think we kind of talked about it a little bit in terms of investing in people, but an alternate strategy for us is the concept of build versus buy, to basically look at local universities and trying to identify top talent that's just emerging into the market. And if you have those type of internship programs and you're hiring those talented new college graduates and invest in them, that tends to develop a sense of loyalty to your organization, that they want to stay with you as you gave them that opportunity and continue to invest in them.
We're spending a lot of time talking about the different strategies on, at least from my perspective, the most important element of all of this is the people, and how do you attract and how do you retain your top talent? Because as executives, whether you're actively recruiting or not, surrounding yourself with top performance remains to be the top priority 24/7. When it comes to, and Deepu, I'd love to get your feedback on that. For companies that are able to consistently attract the top talent, they have very solid practices and procedures when it comes to interviewing. Share your thoughts on the most effective interview strategies, at least that have worked well for you, for the pre, during, and maybe post the actual interview, that can help organizations select better and possibly move faster in this highly competitive market.
John, I think one of the key differentiators is we have to be very explicit in the job description as to why we are hiring and what we are hiring for. That clarity is very important. Second is we need to, as the hiring leaders need to spend as much time upfront with the candidate, explaining them the goal, the vision, the purpose, and answering any questions that they may have, so that they can either understand the scope and buys into the vision and approach, or they say, I don't think I'm a fit upfront. So that is very critical. There shouldn't be any ambiguity between or during that process. Next, I would say in defining a role, one would identify what are the critical success factors for that role, and what are the skills that define that success. So it's very important in terms of as you're assessing a candidate, how you're assessing against those skills and traits. So in the panel that we select, we discretely create panels to gauge those skills on that individual. Other things like personality, leadership, teamwork, technical aptitude, attitude, they are key for all roles. So spread that amongst the panels, but it's important that you gauge the person against the critical skills that are mandated for that role.
To take that a little bit further, as part of executive team interviews, Alex, for you as a CEO, I would estimate that you spend a great deal of time interviewing other executives that are looking to join your organization. Share your process for interviewing executives or members of the leadership team. Maybe perhaps what are the types of questions that you like to ask, and what do you look for in some of the responses when you hear them?
Yeah, so I think that, when a candidate reaches to interview with me, they've already been vetted out by many of our leaders here. So what I like to ask, and what I like to make sure that the person fits our culture. By the time they've reached me, I know that from a skill set and from a CV perspective, that they're qualified for the job. I think my job in one of the final interviews is to see if they fit our culture. I'll ask questions from what is their greatest accomplishments. I'll ask them about, what skills are they lacking? And that's the general question. You ask what their strengths and weaknesses are. I like to ask directly, what skills do you think you're lacking? If they're currently employed, I'll ask them if there's anything, what don't you like about your job? I want to make sure that that they have vision and that their ability to execute is there. But more importantly, do they fit our culture? We here at Cleveland Clinic, we've been known to promote from within and give junior executives a chance to move up in our company. And that goes back to my comments before about career ladders and retention. And, we're of the belief that you can teach someone the technical skills needed, but you can't teach them compassion, and you can't teach them, what they have from a compassion point of view, or what they're composed of internally. So we're willing to go outside the box and really train them. And I'd rather have that than somebody with an extensive experience that comes in with a chip on their shoulder and becomes disruptive to what we're all trying to accomplish. So I think my job on the executive side is to make sure that they fit the culture and that they don't become disruptive. And it's not a perfect science. We've hit a lot of home runs, but we've also struck out on some that we thought were going to fit. But I think that it's very important that we screen them for culture to make sure they fit our culture.
Great points, Alex. Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to switch gears a little bit and talk more on the future of work perspective. And Steve and Deepu would love to get your thoughts on this. According to Deloitte, the future of work is being shaped by two different powerful forces. One is the growing adoption of artificial intelligence in the workplace. And I think both of you have mentioned some of the initiatives from at least the technology side, and the expansion of the workforce to include both on and off the balance sheet talent. What changes could be in store for the workplace, the workforce, and just the overall nature of work itself based on the current initiatives in place at your organization? Steve, if you don't mind taking that first.
Yeah, so I think I started mentioning something before. Both of what I'm about to say are certainly not new, but it is causing us to kind of double down or look at these areas more. The first is that concept I was talking about just a moment ago, which is really, build versus buy. Of course, we want to hire talented, senior team members, but at the same time, we're making a heavy investment in harvesting a lot of the new talent that's coming out of the universities, and really investing in a growth engine to make sure that those individuals are prepared and productive and contributing pretty quickly. And so that's one element, is this build and buy strategy. Secondarily is really focusing on our own nearshore capability. So again, something not entirely new, but as the talent war started to ramp up here in the United States, obviously we would continue to look for the top talent here, but it also kind of forced us to look for top talent in nearshore countries like Costa Rica, Mexico, and Colombia, but not just do it in kind of a contract model, but really try to make them part of the organization by having points of presence with our organization in those countries, and really kind of making sure that they feel part of the family and part of the culture, and make sure that they are part of the organization versus just outsourcing that function. And so those are, some of the top two strategies that we've looked to move to, or is that build and buy, and also a kind of nearshore strategy being our own badged employees.
Those are great points, Steve. Deepu, if you don't mind adding your perspective for that particular question as well. And moreover, how is your organization preparing for that next period, whatever that is, when it comes to perhaps bringing the workers to the offices or designing the hybrid infrastructure? Maybe what models are being designed, strategies to deal with employee anxiety and things like this. Share with us from that perspective.
Sure. If there's one thing that the pandemic taught us, or highlighted, it's essentially our ability to quickly adapt. We have seen organizations who otherwise have never done before transition to a remote work environment in a matter of weeks, and yet delivering complex, groundbreaking solutions. Traditionally, with global teams, it was not as a big lift from a technology team's perspective because they always had a footprint of teams in nearshore, offshore model. So with that, John, we are a remote organization from a technology and digital perspective. That shift for the organization happened the last couple of years or so. And it helped us, as I mentioned, we are in the midst of a transformation. So it helped us bring the right talent because it's, as you know, it's very hard to find talent, especially if we were to localize that hiring, it would have been increasingly difficult. And from a workplace perspective, our strategy is essentially bring teams together for strategic discussions, project implementations, group discussions, and as such, otherwise stay remote.
Great points, Deepu. Thank you for sharing that. Alex, according to a recent Accenture's US Innovation Survey, 60% of companies admitted that they did not learn from the past mistakes in relationship to their approach to corporate innovation. Also, 72% of organizations poll said that they often miss the opportunities to exploit these underdeveloped areas of market. What do you think is the best approach to allow for mistakes, but leverage these lessons learned towards that corporate innovation results?
Yeah, I think first, you know, and it goes back to what I said from interviewing. I think it's making sure that everybody has the right goals in mind and try to make them as similar as possible. I think that historically, there's been a lot of competing powers with different interests that really have hampered us to really move forward in some of the visions or innovations that we wanted to roll out. And I think that the lesson learned is, you know, I think that upfront, those discussions have to be held. And I'll give you some examples. You know, we're looking at some initiatives now that are very innovative, not from, and it does have an IT component to it, and that's hospital at home. So we're starting to roll out a hospital at home program where we could treat our patients in their home setting the same way that we treat them here. Obviously, depending on the acuity of the patient, will drive that. But, you know, I think that this is one of the innovations that is being rolled out by multiple organizations, and it's what the future is holding. You know, we're not trying as a healthcare organization or even as a region to create more beds. We're trying to, how can we treat more patients at home safely? And I think technology is going to have a big component to that. Also, you know, virtual visits. We talked a little bit about virtual visits. What the pandemic has really allowed us, or not allowed us, it's forced us, is to roll out virtual visits quicker than maybe we would have. And I'm speaking for a Cleveland Clinic. We would have. We did have a component of it, but I think it's really grown because of the pandemic. And I think we've learned a lot of lessons on how to roll out initiatives quicker. You need to be nimble. I think it was mentioned before about being flexible and being nimble. With all the changes that are occurring in healthcare, if you can't adapt quickly, I think you're going to fall behind. So I think those are a lot of the lessons learned that we've had. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to, you know, everybody being on the same page with initiatives that we need to roll out.
Great points, Alex. Thank you for sharing that. And we're running close on time, so I'm going to do one more question, and then I'll start taking the questions from the live audience. Steve, small companies and startups, as we both of us know, can out-innovate larger organizations such as IBM, you know, whatever the large company is, not because of what they do, but because of how they think. What are your thoughts on framing that right state of mind and thought process on your teams that you're currently leading that would allow for such culture of innovation to cultivate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure there's a lot of great approaches on how to solve some of those challenges. But for me, when I think about what differentiates maybe some of those smaller companies or startups versus maybe those larger companies, I think about three different things. The first is really around focus. Typically for the small companies and the startups, there's one main thing that the organization can rally behind, and everyone's aligned on what that main thing is, and they can go out there and do what they need to do. In contrast with the larger organizations like an IBM, to use your example, a lot of times there's multiple top initiatives. Sometimes those initiatives are actually competing for resources from each other. And so they tend to serve more as a distraction and kind of take you away from one single main thing, where those smaller companies have much more laser focus on doing the things that they need to do. The second thing, I think you're talking about mindset. I think the larger organizations, get to a point where they've been successful, they are successful, and there's a level of comfortableness that's associated with that. Whereas some of the smaller companies and the startups are effectively fighting to survive. They have to innovate to compete. They have to innovate to make it in the market, where some of those large organizations don't necessarily have to do that. So it's that fighting for survival mentality that I think you see in a lot of startups that maybe at times the larger organizations may not have as much. And then the third bucket is really in terms of having the right mindset from an operating model standpoint, which is a lot of the larger organizations. There's, because when you get to a company of a certain scale and size, you have to have more organizational control. You're separating roles because of the size of the organization. You're putting in more process to make sure that there's more controls. But all of those things serve as hurdles and obstacles and speed bumps in terms of innovation. And so I think those smaller companies and startups, they're able to be more nimble, to use Alex's term, and they can innovate faster because they don't have all of those organizational and process hurdles that get in the way and slow those things down. So those are typically the top three things that I think about that differentiates the smaller startups from some of the larger organizations.
Exceptional point, Steve. Thanks for sharing that. So I'll switch over to the live Q&A with our audience. I'm getting questions from all different directions. And Deepu, I'm going to take that first question that I have here, which is within the lines of I'll paraphrase this. It's around healthcare and technology, the most in-demand skill sets that are the hardest to find, at least for you, that you had experienced in the current market. I guess the question is around which skill set are the hardest to find, and what would you recommend for them, to find such talent?
The niche skill sets are common across healthcare and technology organizations, right? So when it comes to software engineers, for one, when it comes to AI ML skill sets, so the arena is actually wide open when it comes to hiring for those talents. Amazon may be looking for the same skill sets as other big players, as well as small players. So from a hiring perspective, what we have seen is those roles or skills that are common across industries are somewhat constrained recent times. When it comes to healthcare, the hardest skills that we have had difficulties around integration and FHIR because of the newness in it and the evolution in that space.
Couldn't agree more with you. Thanks for sharing that, Deepu. Next question, Alex, if you don't mind taking this, it's around AI. Speaking of AI smart agents, the question is about what kind of patients in-home health monitoring systems do you currently have in place or looking into? I believe you started mentioning that as part of some of the technology trends that you guys are exploring.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I had said before. With our, we haven't rolled it out, so we're still looking at the monitoring systems that we're going to need, but we are looking at, again, hospital from home, and how can patients that have lower acuity conditions, how can we monitor their vital signs? How can we monitor their conditions, and how can we effectively treat them? So we're looking at different technologies, John. I can't get into the details of exactly what we're looking at, but we're looking at how can we comprehensively and safely treat a patient from home that would normally be here for a handful of days. So those lower acuity patients that are occupying beds now, because our census right now, we have over 100% occupancy typically here. So how do we decompress that with lower acuity patients using technology to safely monitor those patients?
Great, thanks, Alex. Steve, I'll let you take the next question. Is all around the trends that you believe will dominate the healthcare industry in the coming years, such as any blockchain related technologies?
Yeah, that's interesting. That is something that we've explored and continue to explore in terms of blockchain specifically. Still haven't found that silver bullet application for it just yet, but we have a lot of hypothesis right now that we're going through in terms of our innovation labs. I think in terms of the tech to pay attention to, it's really a lot of what's been out there. It's going back to what I was saying earlier in the conversation. It's really around truly landing the plane and applying the great technologies that we have out there, like specifically ML, to really kind of get the outcomes that you're looking for. So again, it's nothing new, but really developing a strong competency, not just from a technical perspective, but applying that in a way that's truly driving it. In our case, clinical and patient outcomes is, what I continue to foresee being a huge force in the healthcare space.
Great points. Thanks, Steve. There's a few questions on the patient privacy and the data integrity and the security. Maybe Deepu, I'll let you take a portion of that to share some thoughts on best practices when it comes to protecting the patient's data, their privacy with the digital healthcare.
Yeah, I don't think it is anything specific from a digital healthcare perspective, whether the access patterns are digital or not, the data needs to be secured. Traditionally, in a non-digital world, it becomes challenging because we have file papers and file cabinets that needs to be protected, which is more a physical element. But with the extent of security tools and implementations, the digital safeguarding digital data becomes much more easy compared to traditional means. For example, we have encryption at all layers, the access controls and protections, tools that alerts in terms of if the data access pattern changes. So there are discrete tools and processes that we can apply that safeguards that data.
Makes perfect sense. Thanks, Deepu. Alex, I'll let you take the next question. Is how are you preparing your organization for the next pandemic?
Hopefully not. I think, a lot of effort has been done over the last couple of years, John, regarding the pandemic, especially in the first wave, where nobody really knew what this pandemic was and what the effect it was going to have on healthcare. I think over the last 2 years with the 3 waves that we had from the Delta and Omicron, I think there was a lot of lessons learned. And I feel comfortable as an organization. We've done a lot of surge plans where we have planned, God forbid, that we had an increase in COVID patients, where we would place them safely, and even looking at non-traditional areas of placing patients in order for us to have the ability to take care of them. We have, just to give you an example, we have over 200 licensed beds, and we have made plans. Thank God we didn't have to use them to take care of double the amount of patients, over 400 patients if we had to, in case there was a pandemic that called for patients to be admitted. Thank God the 2 recent phases of the pandemic have not increased our inpatient occupancy, even though we're seeing a little bit of trend recently. But we've done a lot of work on surge plans that allow us to take care of patients safely in non-traditional areas. So during the first pandemic, we had a lot of intensive care patients that we had to really mobilize in different areas. But I think, and I speak for all of the organizations because I've been on calls with all of our partners in Dade and Broward. I think we all came together, collaborated, and feel comfortable that if we had to exchange resources, space, we are in a good place. God forbid we have another pandemic.
Thanks, Alex, for that. Steve, I'll let you take the next question. Is all around, do you currently use outsourced, offshore, or nearshore partners, whether that's for software development or any other parts of the organization? And if so, how do you ensure that those resources are successful and effective when it comes to understanding and knowing local US-based healthcare and technology laws and regulations?
Got it. That's a loaded question. So yeah, you know, with part of our talent strategy, you heard me mention earlier about, you know, our build strategy. You also heard me mention our kind of badge employees nearshore strategy, but we also rely on heavily as part of our strategic plan, contract talent, as well as offshore talent as well. And so our general strategy for that, though, is twofold. One, we want to make sure that anyone that's working in our environment does feel part of the culture and doesn't feel like separate teams. And so we basically extend, you know, the same benefits, the same operating model, team building, all the things that we would do for our internal team members, we extend to our contract staff and our offshore nearshore staff as well. And then secondarily, from, you know, knowing the healthcare domain, or specifically with privacy regulations, we do have to be a little bit more calculated in determining kind of what work goes where. But generally speaking, you know, our software engineering efforts, a lot don't have access to production, don't have access to patient data. But in other cases where it's things that are more sensitive, we use our US-based talent pool to be able to do that, and offshore some of the less domain-specific work to some of those nearshore or offshore partners. And so we have to be a little bit more calculated and deliberate about what work goes where.
Great points. Thanks, Steve. Deepu, I'm going to take you last question and possibly our last one. It's from YouTube comments. It's around leverage and use of cryptocurrencies, DAOs, or Web3 in healthcare technology. Do you see any applicable use cases for the advanced technologies as such? Wow.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hype around Web 3.0 and cryptocurrencies and whatnot. Healthcare from a technology footprint perspective is somewhat behind. So we have to get to a steady state before we can evangelize on the advanced technologies and tools, so to speak. I don't know about cryptocurrency use cases, but blockchains, when it comes to decentralized patient linking, probably is one of the use cases for blockchain.
That's great. Great. Thanks, Deepu. And on that note, I think we're out of time, and I would love to really, sincerely thank our panelists for taking the time and share your thoughts and leadership expertise with the rest of us. And thanks to all our participants for very active engagement and listening to this executive webinar. So on top of that, thanks to everyone and have a great weekend.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Take care.